Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers, is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book, a program of the Minnesota Humanities Commission, with funding provided by Target Stores and the Elmer L. and Eleanor J. Anderson Foundation.
Welcome to Northern Lights. I'm writer Faith Sullivan, and today I'm talking with Alison McGhee, short story writer and novelist. Alison's first novel, RAINLIGHT, published in 1998, was the winner of the 1999 Minnesota Book Award for fiction. Her second novel, Shadow Baby, was released in spring of 2000, and we're going to be talking with her a bit about both books, but first about Shadow Baby, her most recent book. What was the inspiration for this novel, Alison?
The inspiration for Shadow Baby was an image that occurred to me, or appeared to me, I should say, probably 6 or 7 years ago. And this image, which kept haunting me for years, was an old man walking away from me in the middle of a pine woods in winter. There was snow everywhere, and his back was to me. He had on a long overcoat, and in one hand he was carrying a tin lantern, and the tin lantern was a candle lantern, and he just kept walking away from me, and the image appeared to me over a period of years. And so in part the novel stemmed from a desire to figure out who this old man was and what he meant to me.
All right, okay, that's interesting. Do you consider Clara Winter, who is the central figure in Shadow Baby, to be sort of an artist as a young girl?
I do think of Clara Winter as a sort of portrait of the artist as a young girl. And in Clara's case, she's an artist of words. She lives and breathes words. She has a collection of words that she considers to be perfect words that belong to her and her alone. She reads so voraciously that it seems that much of her life takes place in books and in words and in the fantasies that she spins out from her imagination, much like an adult writer does. Clara, in fact, has a hard time distinguishing fact from fantasy, so immersed in words and the imagination is she.
Yes, oh, I love that about her. This is a girl who's going to go far. Clara forms a friendship with an elderly immigrant man, and at first it seems to be a sort of a strange combination, these two, the young child and the old man. And yet, are there similarities between them, and what draws them to each other?
Well, as Clara would be the first to point out, she understands that it is probably viewed as strange by the outside world that a child of 11, which is her age, would be drawn to a man who is 77. And Clara also finds it miraculous that his age is exactly 7 times her own age, but that's beside the point. She first sees the old man when he is lighting up the woods for skiers, for cross-country skiers. She observes him from the solitude of a church. She peeks through a little crack in the stained glass window and she sees this old man hanging tin lanterns in the woods for skiers. And she watches as the skiers all raise their poles to thank the old man, but he never looks at them. He never waves back. After he's lit up the woods for them, he turns and he goes back to his home. and she intuits that he is a person who is comfortable with solitude and who has figured out a way of living that is peaceful. And that is something that she has yet to do. She is a girl tormented by her past and by unanswered questions. And so she believes, as she watches this old man in the woods, that he is someone who can teach her how to live in a way that will allow her to go on living, to find some peace in her torment.
That scene of the old man lighting those lanterns is something that I will never forget. I thought that was just exquisite, that visually exquisite scene. I can't think of any scene I've ever read in a book that stayed with me as a picture so clearly and beautifully.
Well, in a way, that was my inspiration for the book. It was that old man walking away from me through the woods, carrying that lantern. I just wanted to know why he had that lantern and what he was going to do with it. And then I gradually came to understand as I wrote the book that he had made the lantern, that in fact that was what he did. He was a metal worker. And his favorite art form, in fact his only art form, is that which he can make out of metal, sheet metal to be precise. And so his works of art include those tin candle lanterns and cookie cutters, which he makes out of discarded tin cans. And he had begun to teach Clara the art of making these objects when suddenly he was taken from her. And in a way, that event that takes him away from her is what sparks Clara's understanding that she was an apprentice to the old man.
Yes.
That he had taught her a great deal about life and how to live it, and that she now must go on alone.
So he was truly a bringer of light to Clara.
He was a bringer of light to Clara.
Yes.
Yes.
Ah, it's lovely. I wonder if you'd be willing to read us a little scene from Shadow Baby now. Can you do that?
I certainly will.
All right.
As preface to this little excerpt, I should tell you that it is in the voice of Clara, who at the time is 11, and she is talking. She is going into a sort of soliloquy about books and book reports and how her teachers require her to write a book report.
All right.
And her feelings about that. They like us to read a book and do a book report on it once every 2 weeks. Now that you're in 6th grade, they say, time to develop your critical faculties, etc. I scoff at this. The teacher's definition of a book and my definition of a book do not coincide. 50-page minimum, they say. What kind of book is only 50 pages long? A comic book? It hurts me to see a book report. It's painful to me. Book reports are to books what A, brown sugar and water boiled together until thick is to true maple syrup from Adirondack sugar maples. B, lukewarm reconstituted non-fat powdered milk is to whipped cream. And C, a drawing of a roller coaster is to a roller coaster ride. Give me a real assignment, I say. I like to read books one after another, immerse myself in a book and then immerse myself in the next book, and just keep going until there aren't any more books left to swim in. That's why I hate it when authors die. I cannot stand it. There will be no more books forthcoming from that person. Their future books died with them. In the past, I have found a series of books and loved it so much that all I wanted to do was read and read and read those books for the rest of my life. Then I would find out that the author was dead. Had in fact been dead for many a year. This has happened to me several times. You can see how much it would hurt me to write a book report every 2 weeks. I could do such a thing only to a book I hated. And why would I read a book I hated? Self-torture? My only option is to make them up. Besides, there are not too many unread by Clara Winter books left in the school library. It's a strange feeling to walk down a row of books with your head bent so you can read the titles and recognize most of them. Amelia Earhart, American aviator. Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the telephone. George Washington Carver, American botanist. I like biographies. I like the early childhoods of famous people. Sometimes they're what you'd expect them to be, sometimes they're not. I like reading between the lines of famous early childhoods. My favorites? Pioneers. Winter explorers. The kinds of pioneers who bore the burden of snow and ice, who faced the cold head on. Winter is to be feared. But who thinks about that now? Everyone thinks we've conquered winter. Houses with heat, cars with heat, stores and schools with heat. They forget what it used to be like. They can't begin to imagine what it was like for the pioneers with one small fire in an unchinked cabin, or how cold it must have been in the Indians' winter camps. Imagine it. We are close to death every winter day. What if the furnace went out, and the electricity went out, and the phone line went out, and the blizzard raged so hard that the road was a pure whiteness, and you slowly burned up everything wood in the house, and then you twisted newspaper into tight rolls and burned them like fast-burning logs, and then started in on your summer clothes and the sheets and towels and mattress stuffing and anything else that could possibly burn, and finally even tore all your books apart and burnt the pages all the time, jumping up and down to stay warm, dancing even with all your winter clothes on? It wouldn't matter. You would die. No one thinks about things like that. They all feel so safe. Not me.
Thank you so much for that lovely reading, Alison. I know everyone who is hearing this is going to be intrigued and want to read Shadow Baby at the first opportunity. Is your writing influenced by other art forms?
It is. I think I'm a very visual person, and most of my books and stories seem to begin with a single image that recurs to me, such as the old man walking through the woods. And so I would think I'd be influenced by painting more than anything else, but I'm not. It's music that is very influential on me. Certain songs that I hear weave themselves into my heart and become almost a textural backdrop for a book. And as I'm writing, I'll often play the same music over and over, hundreds of times. And it's a good thing I'm by myself, because it would drive my husband insane. But over and over, the music ingrains itself into me, and it imparts a feel for a book to me. And another art form that's influential on me is dance. Dancers, particularly people who are doing unusual things with their dance, such as Savion Glover, the tap dancer, the very young tap dancer, who took an old art form and sort of turned it inside out with the way he interprets that art form. And so I can look at him dancing and see the way he flings himself into the air and what he does with his body, and somehow this has an influence on my writing. So it's probably an interweaving of art forms, I'm not sure.
Fascinating. Are you yourself a dancer? You look like you could be.
I only wish I was.
Well, you look like one.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Could you talk to us a little bit about your writing process? And did Shadow Baby, the process for writing that novel, was it pretty much like the same process that you used in writing RAINLIGHT, or were they different?
The process I used to write Shadow Baby was, in fact, similar to RAINLIGHT. Both books began with a single image. RAINLIGHT began with the image of a child, and something was wrong with the child in a crib, a baby, developmentally delayed, perhaps, straining toward the sun, which was shining through blinds in a window. And he was alone, and he wanted that sunlight. There was something about the shining rays of the sun that he strained for. So that was the image that began that book. With Shadow Baby, it was the image of an old man. And I carried that image around for several years, and then I was on vacation with some friends, and they were having difficulty getting their baby to sleep at night. And one night the father came stumbling out from the bedroom where the baby was. And he kind of flung himself on a couch and he said, "I spend half my life in a dark room singing." And I sat there listening to those words, and I saw them scroll by in my mind, in a dark room, comma, singing. And I thought, that is the feel of my book that goes with the image of the old man.
Oh.
So I then sat down and started to write the book. And my method for writing at that point is to take the image and that texture, that feel, whether it's inspired by a phrase or a song or a dancer, and make a list of random objects within a few seconds that I just pull out of thin air. And all these random objects must belong in that book. They must fit into the book somehow. So for Shadow Baby, I had the old man, and I had the phrase "in a dark room singing," and then in a few seconds I jotted down some things. Ice and snow, fake book reports, dented tin objects, a roll of adding machine paper, and bloody sandals.
Oh, what a
So all
challenge.
these things needed to go into the book.
Yes.
So at that point, I just sort of jump off a cliff and say, okay, you know, way will open. The book will appear to me as I write it.
Oh, I love that. I love how differently novelists are,
Yes.
you know, how they begin their process or begin their story. And it's different with everyone. And I love this. This is fascinating. Clara, the child in Shadow Baby, has a twin who died at birth. Now, what was that to you? Where did that notion come from of having this shadow baby? Can you tell us?
Well, originally, I think it was my sense as a child that somewhere out there was my soulmate. That person who, no matter who it was, would complete me, you know, who would be the missing parts of myself. And it's a very romantic notion, and I no longer really believe it. But that was part of it. And then at the same time that I was beginning to write the book, I read an article by Lawrence Wright in The New Yorker about identical twins separated at birth and how they grow up to be so similar. They marry women who look alike and who have the same name. They have pets and name the pets who are the same kind of species of pet, the same name. They drive the same cars. They have the same professions, despite the fact that they've never been together in their lives.
Yes.
So this was fascinating to me. And part of that fascination was that it's been discovered that many of us were twins originally, that we were conceived as twins, but that very shortly after conception, one twin dies and is absorbed into the remaining twin or into the mother's body. That this is a fairly common phenomenon.
Oh my.
And so I started just obsessing in my writerly way on the implications of the fact that many of us could be walking around having lost
Yes.
a twin. And so that wove itself into the book. And the odd thing is that after the book was published, I received several phone calls from people who, whether they wanted to or just didn't know the difference really between fiction and memoir, believed that this had been my experience and wanted to call and speak because I had captured their experience so closely. In fact, one woman wanted me to start a support group for people who had lost twins at birth.
Oh my.
Because this had happened to her. And I said, you know, I made this up. I never lost a twin. And she said, oh, you did. And that was eerie to me.
Oh yes. Oh.
And so I think, you know, who knows?
Yes.
Who knows?
Yes. Oh gosh, that's just a wonderful, wonderful story, and it illustrates how we never know in publishing something who out there is reading it and how close it has come to their own experience and how profoundly it may touch them for that reason. It's always a kind of a shock, almost a feeling of, oh dear, should I be doing that? You know. And on the other hand, it's a wonderful feeling too to know that you have hit some truth with other people. The old man in the story comes from a country that no longer exists. In creating that character, did you want to kind of pay respect to or homage to all of those immigrant people in our history who came from or come from countries that no longer exist? That must be a strange position to be in.
I think it is an odd feeling. And when I was writing the book, I was not completely cognizant of how much of my own family history perhaps went into the book. But like most Americans, mine is a history of immigration, and my maternal grandfather and his family came to this country. They came to New York City, the Lower East Side, from a country that was either Poland or Russia or someplace that is not Poland or Russia anymore.
Yes.
And they came with all the hopes that immigrants do, and none of their hopes were ever realized. It was not a rags to riches story at all. It was the antithesis of that, and it was a story of struggle and humor and persistence in the face of despair, and that to me is the story that I'm interested in. I don't have too much interest in rags to riches. And so when I wrote the book, I believe I incorporated aspects of my grandfather and my great uncle's lives. And in a larger sense, I think I'm looking at everyone's lives, because at a certain point, the places that you most love, where you no longer live, exist in reality, but they no longer exist the way you remember them.
Yes.
And so all of our beloved places are our memories.
That's true. That's so true. The novel at first seems to be a very straightforwardly written novel, somebody reflecting on the time in their lives in the past, and event builds on event. But I think there is something deceptively simple, perhaps. I mean, maybe there's a lot more to the structure of this book, and is that in part because it's told by a child? What do you think?
Yes, I think that's exactly it. I wanted to write a book in the voice of a girl who is now 12, who is looking back on the last year of her life when she was 11. So necessarily it's confined to a child's perception. She doesnment really believe she's a child, but she is. And yet I was writing it for adults. And so I wanted the adult readers to bring to bear their understanding of the events that surround this child and put their adult interpretation on those events. And yet the most effective way to do that, I think, is to write in the child's voice, which is to be very specific, but not interpret, not explain. Just set the events and the thoughts down, and then let the adult readers bring to bear their thoughts.
Yes, okay. Well, that's certainly one of the charms, I think, of this book.
And the award recipient in novels and short stories to Alison McGhee for RAINLIGHT.
Could you talk to us a little bit about your first novel, RAINLIGHT, and what that was about, so that our viewers can learn a little more about that?
Well, my first book, RAINLIGHT, began with the image of the child straining toward light, and he became a major character in the book. His name is Johnny. And the opening scene in the book is the death of a young man, as witnessed by his father and his ex-girlfriend. And the book then goes back and forward from that event, that death, and is told in alternating viewpoints to show how the death affected those who loved this man, and how they're struggling to move forward in the loss of him, in the face of that loss. And it is a circular structure of a book in which the same event is told and interpreted by 4 different viewpoints. So more than just the study of a loss, it's the study of how a small town is interwoven about its inhabitants, and how an event plays itself out so differently in the lives of different people.
Yes, yes. Well, there's a little bit of that same sort of feeling in Shadow Baby, with the loss of that shadow baby, as it were, too, and how that affected the mother, in a sense, and the way that her life, the turn that her life took, and the grandfather and the child. Clara Winter has trouble distinguishing fact from fantasy, which is one of her great charms. She doesn't really see that there is that big a difference. Does Alison McGhee have that same problem?
Well, that depends who you ask, Faith. If you ask my family, they would say, never believe a word I say, because I cannot help but try to make any story better. So I guess the ultimate answer is that I really cannot trust myself to distinguish fact from fantasy.
Now, do you see this characteristic of yours as forming the basis for some future novel, perhaps?
Well, I think it's formed the basis of this novel, certainly,
Yes.
and it's probably going to weave itself into everything I ever write.
Yes. Oh, that's marvelous. Speaking of future novels, are you currently at work on something?
Well, I just finished the draft of a new novel, which my editor is reading right now. And since I just finished it last week, I may take another 2 or 3 days off before I start something else.
Oh, my. Well, I think that is something that is reasonably typical of novelists, and yet it's always startling, too, to hear that we don't let grass grow under our feet. We finish one project, and there's almost a sense of, oh, if I'm not working on a new project, I mean, who am I?
Yes,
Suddenly.
who am I? If I'm not sitting in that room spinning words out, who am I?
Yes. And when do you write?
I write when my children are out of the house, usually. Sometimes I'll get up at 4:30 or 5 and write while everyone around me sleeps, and I actually love doing that. But for the most part, I wait until everyone's gone, and then I play my music over and over, and I sit with my laptop on my lap on the couch,
All right.
and I spin out the stories.
So you're basically a morning writer then?
In my ideal world, I would be an early morning writer.
Yes.
But in the world I live in, I write whenever I can.
Yes, I can understand that. Yes. All right. I know that you also write short stories. Do you have any preference at all in the two forms, novel and short story,
Originally, I started out writing short stories, and I segued into novel writing, and now I think I might be better at writing novels than at writing short stories.
Okay.
And I look at a master of the short story like Julie Schumacher, and I think this is her forte, the
Yes.
short story. And I feel I may be the best at a tiny thing, such as a poem, and a big fat thing, such as a novel. And maybe the mid-size is not what I'm best at.
It's interesting how that I think is true of probably most writers, that there is one form that they find to be best suited to their personality or their lifestyle or whatever, or just the way their mind works. Well, I want to thank you so much, Alison, for being with us today and sharing your writing process and your 2 wonderful books with us. And I want to thank you for watching.
Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers, is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book, a program of the Minnesota Humanities Commission, with funding provided by Target Stores and the Elmer L. and Eleanor J. Anderson Foundation.